Hello, and welcome to Tales from the Twist, the show where we recap your childhood. My name is Joe Lewis, and I'm joined here today by a man who is a very strange thing indeed. It's Anthony Bull.
Hey Joe, how's it going?
I'm going great. How are you today?
I am doing quite well.
What is the strangest thing that you have ever done?
Strangest thing I've ever done is probably this podcast. Am I right, guys, or am I right? What? No, but what's the strangest thing I've ever done? That's a good question. I wish you'd asked me that before we recorded so I could think of a really clever answer.
Okay, well, you get your clever cap on,
I'll put my clever
and you
cap
come
on.
back to us at the end. We are talking about Stranger Things because it's the Stranger Things podcast. It's the obligatory podcast, the one we had to do. Nobody asked us to do this.
No, nobody did.
But I'm sure that if you'd thought of it, you would have been like, oh, guys, can you do Stranger Things podcast? And we would have been like, nah, until we decided to do it.
Exactly.
So that's what we're doing now, Stranger Things. Stranger Things is, of course, a TV show exclusive to Netflix. So if you don't have Netflix, you can't watch it unless you know how to torrent.
Yep. And then you shouldn't do it either. Wink, 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 wink.
Yeah.
Make sure you have a VPN, though. It's just like, because, Mr. Uncle Mal will check on you where you're from.
Rich Uncle Mal does know where you live. And it's a show reminiscent of the old 80s movies, the old children's horror, but more family horror movies. The 80s were a great decade for horror. Let's just start off by talking about that. To preface this podcast, we're going to do things a little bit differently. We're not going to do it our regular beat by beat. We might do a little bit of that, but we want to be talking about things generally. Stranger Things is one of these family-type horror movies from the 80s, and as I was saying, the 80s was a great period.
It was.
For horror. We had a bunch of stuff going on. The main reason that horror was such a big thing in the 80s was the invention of something we like to call the videotape.
Was it really?
Yeah, well, back in the 80s,
Yeah.
the main two ways that you consume visual media, right, were either it was on TV.
Yeah.
All three ways. Go and see it at the cinema or the drive-ins. The drive-ins were kind of starting to fade by the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
They were bigger in the 70s. I think they were still kind of big in the 80s, much bigger than they are now, of course.
Yeah.
How many people know where a drive-in is? There's two near us.
Yeah, there is.
They're not a big thing anymore.
It's more of a spectacle to just go to the drive-in.
It's more of a novelty.
It's like, oh, we could go pretend like we're the old school people.
But the other thing was the video shop.
Yeah.
So you would go to the video shop and you'd go walk down the aisles and you would see all these amazing videotape covers from films, mostly American. I imagine there was stuff from all over the world at that point. And it was all accessible.
Yeah.
You could go and all of this stuff. Because up to that point, up to the video shop invention, the only ways that you would be able to see new movies was going to the cinema or seeing it on TV.
Yeah.
But now, you could walk down and there's all these videotapes all available to you. So much choice.
Yeah.
Capitalism. America, land of the choice. It's
land
now
of the free, home of the brave, all that.
It's now
lovely
incarnate
nonsense.
in your video shop. You can walk down, you can pick whatever you want. And so what happened was people wanted more choice, even though they had a lot of choice.
Yeah.
They wanted to see cool stuff. They wanted exciting things to watch more than just, whatever was available then. I don't know, the awful science fiction movies of the 1950s or, whatever was on the shelves. So a lot of independent movie making studios were starting to go, we don't have to get a cinematic release for people to see our film. We can skip that and we can go straight into the aisles of a video store.
Yeah.
And one of the best ways to do that, one of the best ways to get somebody to pick your film off a shelf, hire it out, which up the chain gives you money, is to make that cover appealing.
Yeah.
Okay? And what types of covers are appealing to customers?
Oh. It'd be anything that's really grabs your attention with something that's weird on the cover, but it doesn't give the full explanation. It'd be clickbait, but in the 1980s.
Yeah. Essentially the same concept of...
So it'd be, what this killer did with this knife shocked you. And then when you found out what happened to her body...
You'll be asking for more.
You'll be asking for more, yeah.
Anything that's kind of, had that emotional appeal or that instinctual gut reaction. So all of these violent box covers started to become a thing. Like, a lot of films were commissioned just because of their box cover. Like, that's the way a lot of films were started in the 80s.
Yeah.
Like, somebody would draw a box cover and be like, let's make that a movie. We can put that on some shelves. So people would walk down the aisles. They're not too interested in the drama ones because, as we all know, all the drama covers basically look the same.
Yeah. It usually has a white guy in the front looking to the left. It usually has a girl in, you can have half her body, maybe full in a dress, and she's standing like she's a little bit shorter than the dude's head, and then it's got the title underneath at the bottom, and it's like some road or some bullshit field or something.
But the horror covers and the sci-fi covers, they can give you something that it seeds in your mind. Your imagination can sprout. You have that emotional reaction. Oh my goodness, look, there's a horrible looking killer and he's chopping off somebody's head or something.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, I can grab that. And so that's my long-winded explanation of one of the reasons why horror was so big in the 80s.
It's also like the Indiana Jones is a good example as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's obviously made well, but its cover has got so much going on, and it's got Indiana Jones as the main character with a whip through halfway getting ready to strike it. And there's just so much happening. You're like, well, what's happening in this movie? Oh my gosh, I got to know what's happening. Why is he there? Why is he with this? What's going on? It's so adventure-y. And it draws you in. Whereas a killer or a horror it's always the unsettling, unknowing thing. So seeing something scary makes it work.
There's a lot of philosophical stuff going on in the 80s as well with horror, and I will get into that in a second, but with the Indiana Jones as well, they had that, the whole thing going for Indiana Jones was, that callback to the World War II era of adventure films, and making that pulp style of film, accessible again, and making it, this grand adventure spectacle for the 80s era. And that was something that what's his name? Spielberg.
Steven Spielberg.
Steven Spielberg. Yes, Steven Spielberg was really good at making this idea of something that had not been super accessible to families. I'm getting really scattered here.
Yeah.
But, making that idea of sci-fi, science fiction, something really nerdy in the 50s, making that more of like a family atmosphere film, or taking these pulp films from the 1930s adventure films and making it accessible to a family audience with Indiana Jones, and that was the great appeal of what's his name?
Steven Spielberg.
Spielberg. Why have I forgotten his name? Anyway, and combine that with this big allure of the emotional reaction of the horror that was coming out, and you got films like Poltergeist, which incidentally he directed, but is not credited on because you can only have one Directors Guild nomination a year, or something like that. Anyway, I'm starting to ramble, but basically, the 80s was a good time for horror. That's the short of that. I'm going to have to hatchet down that rant. Yeah. But anyway, we are had to talk about Stranger Things, which has a very strong 1980s vibe. And
it does, right? It's like, should be called 1980s the movie, or 1980s the TV show, and then parentheses, it would be called the references. Let
me give a brief overview of the series, and then we can, delve into it a bit more specific. Stranger Things is set in a 1980s sort of semi-rural town. Somewhere on the Corn Belt somewhere, I imagine. A town called Hawkins. Mm-hmm. There's a military installation, the compulsory military installation next to a small town. You have your 80s-looking roads, and you have a small group of children. There's 4 of them, and they like to play D&D.
Of course, that's just what kids do,
One night, when they're finished playing D&D, they're riding home. Something happened, and this one kid falls off his bike and is chased by this monster that's seemingly come out of nowhere and then disappears. And so the rest of the show is about how the town reacts, or very specifically 3 groups of characters react to the disappearance of this child.
Yeah.
So the first group is his friends, his 3 other friends, his D&D friends. So we have Will, the one who went missing. Mm-hmm. He comes from this small family. We'll talk about a little bit about later. Mike, he comes from your nuclear family. He's got a younger sister, a baby sister, an older sister who's in high school and exploring her sexuality, and a mum and a dad. Lucas is the token black kid.
Yeah, pretty much. That's his role.
And Dustin is the token toothless kid.
Or token fat kid, but no fat kid.
Oh, he's chubby.
What's the kid from Goonies called? Truffle Shuffle kid?
I don't remember.
Well, the kid who does the Truffle
Shuffle. He's
that kid, yeah.
Yeah,
or he's the fat kid in Stand By Me.
Yeah, he likes to eat pizza. Yeah. He's a fat kid. That's one group. The second group is Will, the kid who went missing, his single mum, and Chief, the chief of police, Hopper, I think his name is, who is trying to help them find Will. And, they stumble into all sorts of adventures. And then we have the teenagers, which is mostly made up of Nancy and Jonathan. Mm-hmm. Nancy is Mike's older sister, and Jonathan is Will's older brother. And they're, developing relationship over the series, and Nancy's sort of current boyfriend, Steve the asshole.
Yeah.
So they're the 3 groups of characters, and they go on these adventures, and things happen. So as I said before, military installation, monster, you get all those 80s vibes. And so now we launch into,
start, I just thought anyone listening might like to know, we're probably not going to spoil anything.
Well, spoilers are inevitable on something like this.
Well, yeah, but
if
we're
you
probably
don't want to
not going
know,
to spoil that much.
If you don't want to know anything about Stranger Things, go and watch it before you listen to any of this.
Right, but if you don't want to have anything spoiled beyond the first or second episode, all right, because I'm the only person I've only seen the first or second episode, and so I want to run into this. Joe's seen the entire series. Joe is very good at not revealing spoilers. I just say things and then realize, I should have told you that was a spoiler. Whoops. But since I haven't seen the ending, I have no idea what's coming up. So I'll also not, and because I like the show, I'll also not want to hear this spoiler. I'll tell Joe to shut up because, fuck Joe, don't tell me don't give it away. Don't tell me about that person.
But I think if you want to watch it, go and watch it. Don't waste your time watching this. Go and watch it because somebody at some point is going to tell you the end.
And now to do that obligatory thing. So just pause the podcast and go watch the entire season of Stranger Things and come back. Don't worry, we'll be waiting for you.
We'll see you in about 8 hours' time.
Yeah, something like that.
How many episodes is it?
Welcome back.
Well, welcome back to those who went to pause the podcast. But yeah, so we have this idea of the show, and now we're going to talk about a few of the specifics. So, like I said, we don't really want to do the beat by beat, and this is a bit of an experiment. So, our longer term listeners, this is for you guys to say, does this work? Is this too rambly? Do we need the structure of the beat by beat to carry us through? Probably, maybe, judged on how we've gone in the last 10 minutes. We'll go through and we'll talk about different things about Stranger Things. So the first thing, obviously, is the whole 80s aspect. So it's set in the 80s. It's not just a recall to the 80s, like something like Drive. Have you ever seen Drive?
I have seen Drive, yes.
Short tangent. Drive is a film by Nicholas Winding Refn, I think is the way you say it. Mm-hmm. He's a Danish director who's directed some awesome films. He has this really good sense of how to use violence in films.
Yeah.
He uses it really powerfully, and there's this famous interview where they're asking him about how he uses violence in films. It was on the BBC or something, and he said, violence is like fucking. And then they all freak out because it's on the BBC and you can't say the word fucking. And he's like, oh, well. So violence is like sex. You got to lead into it slowly, and then you go bam, bam, bam.
Yeah,
because it's more powerful that
and then
way.
You light a cigarette afterwards.
If you just go straight into the bam, 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 it's not as impactful. Anyway, Nicholas Winding Refn aside, the film Drive is kind of this set in the modern era, but has a lot of callbacks to 80s, and the way that it's shot, the colors that are used, the sounds, the songs, everything is from the modern era, but it's all retro.
It's a callback or reference to a style, and not just the style, but also a production or listening. So there was one scene I distinctly remember where the main character in Drive gets hit by some girl with like a pipe.
Yep.
And the sound is delayed. So he gets hit with the pipe, and then the sound is delayed a second, which is just like an old poor production value where it's like they forgot to sync up the sound properly.
I think you may not have just queued up your DVD properly.
No, because it was just that one part, and the rest was fine.
Okay,
but it was slightly delayed, and I was just like, "That's really cool." That was really cool because it was like this meta joke that I saw in there. Like, there's a little bit of a meta thing in there.
Anyway, Anthony's bad hearing aside,
yes,
Drive is it's recalling the 80s, whereas this is set firmly in the 80s. So it's a period piece. Everything about it is set in the 80s, but still they're making these references about the 80s. So when you think of something that's set in the 80s, you're going to be thinking about, are there going to be jokes about the internet? Is there going to be stuff like that? And one of the good things about Stranger Things is that it kind of deviates from that a lot. And we don't get a lot of those, we're in the 80s references or whatever music they were listening to. They're not listening to this is an 80s song. That's how you know we're in the 80s.
Oh, they'll be like this, Ronald Reagan. Oh, that'd be something along the lines of Ronald Reagan. Oh, I bet you someone's going to shoot him. He's a bit of an asshole. Get it? Because there was an attempted assassination that happens a little bit later.
It's really light on the nostalgia for the 80s as a time period. But everyone praises Stranger Things for its 80s nostalgia, and as what a lot of people don't understand, it's not nostalgia for the 80s, it's nostalgia for 80s films.
Yeah, and it's not just 80s films, there's also just references to other science fiction as well within the whole thing that spans the whole time. I mean, what is it? When did 2001 A Space Odyssey come out? 67, 69?
Yeah, quite a bit before.
Yeah, and so like the main lab or military lab is called Hawkins something
Yeah.
laboratories, and but shortened to HAL. And
Okay.
like obviously that's a reference to what's his
Yeah.
it has to be
2001.
Yeah, 2001.
There's a robot called Hal. Yeah, those cinematic references are all throughout. In the way that it's shot, in posters that we see in rooms. There's a poster for Evil Dead. There's a poster for another Spielberg movie somewhere. In the first episode, Will, there's a flashback to Will, and we'll talk about flashbacks in a bit. But the kid that goes missing, there's a flashback to him earlier. Him and his mum were going to go and see the movie Poltergeist. There are many, many shots that reference E.T. You know, we call these homages. You know, they're shot similar to E.T. There's stuff that looks like The Thing. There's stuff about altered states. And the point that I'm trying to get to is that there's a point where the homage doesn't become homage anymore. And it starts to become, you know, ripping off or, you know, combinating.
You gaze too long into the navel, and then the navel starts to gaze into you.
Sure, why not? But did you get that impression just based on the 2 episodes that you've seen that there's I'm not just talking about the cinematics either, I'm talking about plot, and I don't know how much you've seen so far. I watched the first episode again, but I didn't see the second. But there's a lot of plot points that are taken straight out of other films.
Yeah, there is a lot, and a lot of it is taken straight out of other films, or it's homages. It's cliffhangers. Everything is cliffhangers in at least the first 2 episodes. It's all cliffhangers of some form.
It's a TV show, so you have to lead up to that cliffhanger so you watch the next episode.
Yeah, but it's the way that the cliffhangers are done. It's almost like a Dallas JR Whodunit.
Well, we'd call this show television terms.
It is an incredibly bingeable television show because everything hooks you to the next episode.
Well, let me tell you why.
Why?
You cut me off. I was about to tell you why, and then you just started rambling. This is something that we'd call a serial, right? So it's a show that it's designed so that it keeps going. You know, it's not episodic like a lot of television we have now. It's not The Simpsons, where every single episode is kind of, you could take it out of the timeline and just watch it. It exists on its own. You know, there are story arcs, but mostly they exist in the one episode.
Yeah.
Whereas in this show, if you take any single episode out of the continuum, it loses a lot of its impact because it's designed to be watched in one run, because it has that one continuing story arc that goes across the episodes.
It's like
it's a single storyline. It's a serialized episode.
It's like Prison Break.
I guess I haven't seen Prison Break. But
it's like Orange is the New Black, I guess.
I imagine. I think there's a lot of
shows can be serial, but it doesn't mean they're very good at being serials. Like they have elements of being a serial.
What I was going to say...
Breaking Bad is a serial, kind of.
Kind of, yeah.
But it's not in the same way that this show is a serial, where it's like you feel compelled to watch the next episode because there's so much you have to hear. Versus if you take something out of Breaking Bad's continuity, it is going to confuse you. You know, like, what the fuck's going on? But you can still catch up, and it's not essential. What
I was going to say was, like most things, there's always an in-between. Okay, so not everything has to be, you can watch this all at once, or this is entirely episodic. Most things fall somewhere in the middle. There's always a grey area.
Yeah.
You know, that's something that I really like, the grey area in the middle of everything. So there are shows, you know, like Breaking Bad, there's elements of which that are serialized and elements which that are episodic.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter. The Stranger Things, yes, is very serial. What were we talking about?
We were talking about when homages become ripping off.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me just go through a couple of films that I thought it was very heavily influenced by. So I've had It, you know, The Clown, Stephen King novel, TV miniseries, The Thing. I don't know if you got that kind of influence yet, but the monster's kind of a bit, you know, Cthulhu-y.
I haven't seen, like, again, I've only seen up to episode 2, so I can only see a little bit. So I don't know what the monster looks like.
Yeah.
Don't tell us what the monster looks like.
Well, you've seen the monster.
You've seen a bit of the monster, yeah.
You can see him in the first episode.
You do.
There's a couple of shots you see him. He's like a spooky monster-looking thing.
And you also see like the inside of laboratory, which, again, I'll bring up something in a sec, but you go on.
E.T. Altered States, which is a really cool film that has a lot to do with deprivation tanks. I know you haven't got that far in the story yet. And Firestarter. Yeah. Did you ever watch Firestarter?
It's Drew Barrymore?
Yeah.
I haven't seen that, but it's very much like Firestarter. I know which one you're talking about because she's got secret powers.
As soon as I started watching episode 2, I was like, oh my goodness, this is just modern day Firestarter.
Yeah.
It's a bit different, obviously, because they're mixing it up with other shows, but this is just the blended 80s movie, the show.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why, and we might get into it a bit later, but everyone's praising this show. Yeah. and I don't think it's as good as the hype.
Yeah.
And I'm not part of the backlash, the inevitable backlash where everyone says, oh, it's not as good as you think it is, oh, it's terrible, everyone says it's good, but it's not. It's really just taking good elements of things that already exist and putting them in a modern, palatable format.
Yeah.
It doesn't make it good. It just is recalling things that are good. It's like The Force Awakens, right?
Yeah.
Star Wars The Force Awakens, the 7th movie in the series. Everyone's like, oh my goodness, it's so great. It's just like, it's just Star Wars. It's because it is A New Hope. It's a reskinned A New Hope. You've changed some of the characters around. You've made it a bit worse, but it's A New Hope. Did you have any thoughts on
Other references?
the homages? Yeah.
I thought there were some other homages that you might have missed out, obviously. I mean, we already said the Goonies.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
There's one episode that basically is the Goonies.
Yeah. The first episode, even that, just feels a lot like the Goonies. And I think there's another one. So, like, just 80s horror movies where you know how they have the setup for the horror movie is the girl and the douchebaggy boyfriend.
Yep.
Right? And the boyfriend tries to push her for sex. She's like, oh, I'm not really sure if I want to have sex. And then the boyfriend obviously gets attacked. I don't know if he does gets attacked. Don't tell me. But I'm assuming he will at some point get attacked.
Well,
you know, because, come on, he's a douchey boyfriend. It sets it up like, at least it sets it up like that. You get this feeling when watching it, like, that guy's going to get fucked in the ass. Not literally, but, well, maybe literally if it's the knife or something. I don't know. It's Michael Myers.
Let's segue in and talk about that element as soon as you brought it up. So I mentioned that there's the teenage plot.
Yeah.
And I've seen in other reviews that they've thought that each of the storylines were kind of reminiscent of different types of 80s films.
Yeah.
So obviously the kids one, you've mentioned the Goonies.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're off on a mission, these kids, they're trying to do something, that kind of film. Was it Stand By Me, the other one?
Yeah.
Those types of films.
It's not like Stand By Me. Or it might be. I haven't seen the rest of the episodes.
The teenagers... that plot line is kind of almost like a teenage horror movie, like there's a slasher or something.
Yeah, exactly.
And we'll talk about Steve in just a sec. And the adults are more of kind of a darker cop-based something or other like that, you know?
Yeah.
We have those elements of horror film. But yeah, Steve, right?
It's like Children of the Corn is the bloody adult one.
Maybe.
Like these usually got, or the Wicker Man.
The Wicker Man. Which one are you talking about, though?
Michael Caine version.
Okay.
Yeah, not the shit one.
Not Nicolas Cage. So we're talking about Steve.
Mm-hmm.
He's the guy who's dating Nancy, who is Mike's older sister. Mike being one of the kids who isn't taken by the monster.
He's basically... Mike is basically your main character. If you had to pick a main character, he's probably going to be the main character.
I would disagree with you, but that's because I've seen the whole show.
Oh, you've seen the whole show?
I think that there's kind of... There's 3 or 4 main characters.
Yeah.
So you have Mike, who's the main character of the children's storyline.
Mm-hmm.
You have Nancy, who's the main character of her storyline, and that kind of becomes developed kind of episode 3 and onwards.
Yeah.
When something else happens. And then the third storyline, which is Winona Ryder playing Will's mum, that's her main storyline and her relationship with the cop and them trying to get back the kid.
Mm-hmm.
And let's just talk a little bit about Nancy's storyline since you brought up Steve. Steve's the asshole boyfriend.
Yeah.
And that's basically all he is.
But he's not a super asshole. Like, he's likable at some levels. Like, there's usually when they do it, they try to do like a jock thing, and I think it's where the difference between a homage and a legitimate sort of and a ripping off is done well, because this is a homage. Is like the boyfriend's still an asshole. He's still a douche. He's kind of a dick.
Yeah.
But he's got a sweet side. He's got a funny side. You can see why this girl is interested in him. Like he might. I have no idea if he's attractive because I'm not a girl.
Yeah.
But I assume he is. And he's also seems to be likable and funny. So I can understand why this girl would find him attractive. Whereas in other movies, it's usually the boyfriend's a douchebag. He's a meathead douchebag. And you're like, why are you interested in this guy? He's a fucking dickhead.
You know why
so you have no sympathy in him dying. But this one, you're like, oh, you know, I kind of want to see where this goes.
The reason why I think she's interested in him is because the filmmakers wanted us to have that storyline where it's, you know, the classic 80s. What are they going to do with the sex?
Yeah.
You know, he's pushing for the sex, she doesn't want it, and that since it's an 8-hour show, obviously it becomes more than that. That storyline evolves and develops. But for at least the first few, that's kind of the big push in that storyline, the whole sexual tension before the paranormal enters that storyline. And it's really boring.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I don't like about Stranger Things, is that since it is so chopped up and taken from other films, there's a lot of Stranger Things that's entirely predictable. Yeah. Up until about episode 6, I could predict pretty much 80 to 90% of what was going to happen.
Yeah. Well, if you're doing homages, it just makes sense. Like if you're doing a homage and you're saying this is what it's going to look like, it's like if you're saying I'm going to do a French-inspired delicacy, and then it starts to taste like a French-inspired delicacy made of beef. Well, it's going to taste like a French beef product.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, it's a French Philly steak. Oh, I don't know, because I've just flamed it a bit different. Of course, it tastes French. I can tell that because you were French-inspired. So you're going to get that when you see something that's got a homage to all these different 80s stuff. Well, you know what's coming next. There's like a scene. I don't want to spoil it.
Is it in episode 1 or 2? If it's in episode 1, you can spoil it.
Episode 1, all right? There's a scene with the cook. So
yeah, that's episode 1.
Episode 1, scene with the cook. He calls social services in
to
go get this little girl.
So
and
you're skipping around a bit, but there is a little girl who has escaped from the military facility who may or may not have special powers, and she's been taken into temporary care of this cook who works in a diner, and he calls social services, and
the social services people come straight away. And then they proceed to, when he turns around to say, oh, he's in the kitchen, I'll go get her. And he turns around. The social service worker pulls out a silenced pistol and shoots him in the back of the head. And you knew that was coming.
As soon as she answers the door, you know.
Yeah, because you know that's exactly how that operates. That's how those shady government bureaus operate. This is Cabin in the Woods, the television show, treated true. Right?
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to say before we got tangentialized. Something like Cabin in the Woods, which is a really interesting movie, takes these idea of these expectations and turns them on their head. Whereas Stranger Things takes these idea of these expectations that you have about these shows and just gives them to you.
Yeah.
So Steve, the asshole character, acts exactly how every other asshole character acts. So you can entirely predict his actions. And Nancy acts exactly the way you would expect the nerdy turning to popular girl to act.
Yeah.
She wants to be true to her friends, Barbs, who we're going to talk about soon. Don't worry.
He's a fat Molly Ringwald.
Yeah, she's the Molly Ringwald kind of, which is interesting because
Molly Ringwald plays a whole bunch of different characters, and
Nancy's the typical Molly Ringwald character, I think. Yeah, Nancy is entirely predictable as well in her movements, which makes that plot line, for the most part, at least for pretty much all of the way, entirely predictable. You know that she's going to get back in touch with Jonathan Byers, and they're going to have adventures alongside this relationship with Steve. Steve's going to get jealous, blah, 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 blah. The kids, however, are mostly predictable, but there are some little deviations. Like, I think they're almost entirely predictable as well, because you know that when the cop tells them to stay out of the way, don't go looking for your friends, this is in a Lord of the Rings movie, they're going to go and look for Will.
Yeah.
They're going to get involved in this dangerous stuff, and they're going to have confrontations with things they shouldn't be confronted with. Namely, as we find out right at the very end of the episode, the little girl we were talking about before, who we later find out is called 11, or L. The girl with these powers, she has magical things, and the kid's trying to work out how to deal with her and also how to balance the looking for their friend.
Yeah, exactly.
And then in the adult sphere, the only major difference is we have the crazy mum, Winona Ryder, who's desperate to look for her son, and the drunk cop. Yeah. Now, pivoting a little bit to talk about the drunk cop, I thought the only reason there was kind of almost innovation was that the drunk cop isn't really a drunk cop. So we get set up that the chief of police is this drunk. Yeah. There's cans of alcohol around his house. He's washed up. He used to be some hotshot from the city, as you would predict, right? All the stereotypes, all the tropes, whatever you want to call them. He's come to live in the country to be chief of police because nothing ever happens here and it's easy. Mm-hmm. And he can get drunk and put away his sorrows about his horrific past. Now, as soon as anything starts to happen, we never see him drink again. And it kind of... that drunkenness was just the setup for his character, but it doesn't really affect his character, which doesn't inform his character, which means he makes different choices to the typical 80s drunk cop that we might see in one of those movies like we talked about, like It or something like that. Yeah. But not for the right reasons.
And not only that makes sense. He drinks, right? And usually when you have a drunken cop,
he's making mistakes, he's making mistakes,
and finding the person or doing whatever the plot tells him to do is his redemption story. Yeah. And that would not be the case if your character just stops drinking and takes it more seriously. And it establishes this idea of that I guess reality and fantasy aren't always are different, and they don't always go the same way that everyone predicts. And you'd think that a character that is drunk should have a redemption story, but it's not. He's just like to get drunk, and once he needs to be on the job, he stops drinking.
Yeah, he's far too competent to make it interesting, right? He makes some mistakes, but not mistakes that impact anything. So basically, whenever he senses a lead or something, he follows it and is right.
Yeah. And that's something I wanted to bring was related to that reality and fantasy idea, was this whole movie, as you say, is a callback to the 80s. Even inside the TV show, it's a callback to better times.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, there's a lot of times where there'll be flashbacks to times before the child is lost, Will. And there's one scene where he's in a tent, and it's like all lit in a certain way. It's very bright colored. And his mum comes in and it's like, oh, it's fun. Yeah, yeah. She opens the door. This tent now, it's all dull, grey, sepia toned. Not sepia toned, but it's like really dull coloring. He's no longer there. It's this, I'm in the current moment now, and I want to go back to a previous decade. I want to go back to a previous time, sorry. And it happens with another case with the older brothers playing music for him in the past.
Yeah. The Clash. He's playing Clash.
Playing the Clash. And that could be a reflection on us as consumers or viewers of this media, that we want to go back to another better time when movies were better. They had a better ring to it. They had a nostalgic feel to them, because we're now in this current generation of, I don't want to call it schlock, but we'll call it like, we're dissatisfied with the current generation. We have these rose-tinted glasses that made everything look beautiful and more colorful. That's why so us watching this is going back to that better time.
Well, I think more specifically than that, and let's see if we can stay on this, because I like where you're going with this, but I think more specifically than movies in general, Stranger Things is a statement about horror, okay? Which is really interesting, because something that I really wanted to talk about was the philosophical implications of horror, because horror's always been strongly linked to societal changes, societal fears, things that are present in, the collective subconscious, rather than stuff that's in comedy, right?
Yeah.
So horror has always reflected the fears of the masses or the concerns of the masses. And, sci-fi as well. Sci-fi is always, the thinking of the now projected in the future. So, 1984 was concerns about the time and about, people watching you projected in this way that read as predictions of the future, when it was actually, contemplations of the present.
So horror is this is an examination of things on the fringe, or things in our society that concern us, or of an issue, of a discussion that you can take two ways: either the horror or the sci-fi. It's like, what's the future of this, or what are the negative implications of this? What is the problem in our society? Why are we so creeped out by this?
Well,
and that's what makes us creepy. But then I'm thinking about comedy, is that comedy is also not that, but it's a subversion of currently established norms.
Yeah, exactly. There's a couple of things in that. First of all, horror is... there's two layers, right? One is Stranger Things making a comment about horror, plainly that? Is it as shallow as that? Or is it also making... is it strong enough to be able to make a comment about our times as well? Because traditionally, all the best horrors that have struck a chord, like The Exorcist, for example, or Rosemary's Baby, or anything like that, have stuck onto something that has struck a chord with society. So, for example, The Exorcist, right? The Exorcist was a massive hit when it came out. This story of this little girl in a conservative household that suddenly becomes possessed by the devil and starts saying, "Oh, I'm going to fuck your mother," blah, blah, blah. And that really hit home, and a lot of critics think that that's because of this feeling of the time, this angst, that...
changing of the time.
Not just the changing, more specific than that, but, this big menace from outside. Threats had always been external, right? Threats always come from other countries or other cities, like or Russia, other places. Yeah, Russia. And now suddenly there was this threat that Russia or whatever external threat was now inside the country, inside your family even. And that evil, that darkness, that threat was going to come inside your family and ruin your family, tear your family apart. And that's what kind of, echoed through the streets, this feeling of fear because of this outside coming inside. And The Exorcist so powerfully put into that little package that is aged like milk. It's not a great movie now.
Yeah, so you can see, like, you take an example of different times periods, and you can even apply it. So you take the 50s, you got the Red Scare, the Red Menace. People are scared that the Reds are under the bed.
Yeah, exactly. The invasion of the body snatchers.
Exactly, that's what that is. But then you've got the 60s. 60s don't need to internalize their threats, because the externalized threats are there in American culture. And and those are things such as the Vietnam War was one. But the other biggest one was the Civil Rights Act. And it wasn't so much to do with the civil rights act occurring. It was more to do with the fact of the angry protesters that you were concerned about and the destabilization of your current status quo. Once that quells, it now becomes an internal threat because there's no more external threats. What's causing issues? You had Watergate. You had a whole bunch of other issues within America itself, which demonstrated that the threats were not external, but internal to America, as well as to the family unit.
Yeah.
So, and I think that extended even to the 80s.
Yeah.
And then the 90s, of course. Well, the 90s was weird. The 90s was still that. 90s was still that because we had the degradation of the USSR, which meant less external threats. And you had to find things like video games were the new bully or the evils. And then 9/11 happened, and all of a sudden, boom, it was this catalytic switch from internal threats to this external threat of terrorism. Everything was about terrorism.
Yeah.
And it's still that today.
Yeah, not just terrorism, but this idea of this threat that could be anywhere.
Yeah.
This threat that you can't eliminate. And is that still the big threat? Like in a 2016 society, is the threat that everyone is thinking about, is that still the same as 2002?
I think at some level it is, but it's changed slightly. And it's only changed because of recent geopolitical changes.
Okay,
the
you
migrant
want to
crisis.
outline those?
So I'll talk about the migrant crisis, the Syrian conflict, and Arab Springs, as well as this perception by some members of society, and it's not like a huge member, but it's still a portion, about the elites in society, the political elites, going one way where society wants it to go another way. You had the Bernie Sanders, you had the Donald Trumps, you had the Pauline Hansons who were like just talking, and they were demagogues, but because they were talking in one direction that people wanted to head in, they became really popular.
Okay.
And they were going against this establishment.
So Stranger Things has obviously been really, really popular. And if you're correct in identifying those current societal threats, like people thinking societal change is not the way they want it to go, like it's kind of an us against them, or, who do we trust type thing. Do you think that's illustrated through the story of the show? Like there's this military installation who are doing spooky things. Their interests aren't necessarily our interests, or
because that's something that's becoming now. Maybe not with the military, but at least with the figures working behind the scenes of the militaries. We'll go Benghazi.
Yeah.
That sort of situation. And not just that, the issues happening in Ukraine and the Arab Springs. But I just had a thought.
Okay.
Thunderbolt, one of those bolts that goes in your brain. What if this is the media personification of Make America Great Again?
Right, you want to explain your thought process?
So if I'm talking about the harkening back to a better time, a time in the 80s when things were rose-colored and tinted, America in the 80s was a powerhouse of economics and strong national unity.
Yeah.
We want to go back to a time when the world was safer and the world was in the direction, at least Americans do, want to go back to a time, many of them, want to go to a time when it was better for them. And they feel like it's not. And that's why that Make America Great Again was such a strong slogan for Donald Trump. And this is personified, well, not personified, mediafied, I guess you want to call it. Mediafied in Stranger Things, where we want to go back to a better time period, which is the 80s. It was better back then because it's not the current world today. There's no terrorism. There was just, the only threat was this weird domestic threat, and we had to invent these weird government parasites as opposed to real threats, which are terrorism. They're the grey in our real world versus the rose-tinted threats of fake make-believe bullshit aliens.
But to follow your idea through,
Yeah.
that Stranger Things is, better times, the 80s depicted in Stranger Things are not better times. This is a time where the government's interests do not coincide with individual interests. Not at all. Not in any way. This is a time where, something that I was going to say, the kids feel like complete outsiders. They don't feel like they can even talk to anybody in their own country.
Yeah.
Their own families, because their beliefs are so alien to everyone around them.
That still resonates with the people today who might even want to harken back to that or go back to another time.
Yeah, but it's not saying the 80s are a better time. They're just more of
It is trying to harken back to a better time. It is trying to harken back to something else. It's trying to recall a better memory. And it's also pulling in new things today that are still threats to us.
I guess I could see where you're going.
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to say, like, you saying that the 80s are a better time. The 80s and Stranger Things are not a better time.
No.
Hawkins, the name of the town in Stranger Things, that is not a good place to live. I would not want to live in Hawkins.
Well, what if it starts off drawing you in that way? Because I remember I've only seen 2 episodes.
Yeah.
Right? So it starts drawing you in that way, and then as the hook goes through, it comes through with this idea of, you've got this great time. I was back then. It was like this. They made movies better back then. Oh, it was different times. It's refreshing. And as you go through, you realize that the 80s was actually not that. 80s was exactly as it is now, which is this time of it had its own threats, its own problems, and it was not this rose-tinted miracle land that we all think it was.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, it is actually, it had its own problems just like today. So stop trying to dream of the nostalgia and the past
that's
and
good.
move forward.
Yeah, I like that. We'll come back to that kind of thing, but let's just start talking about a couple of things from the first few episodes. Have a chat about some of the specifics, some of the stuff that happened. So one of the things that I wanted to talk to you was get your thoughts on Benny the cook. Yeah. Now, I thought Benny the cook, the owner of the diner in episode 1, is probably one of the best characters in this entire show.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. Is he the one? He's the one who is the who gets shot, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I liked him.
Yeah, he was great.
He was cool. He was like, he's offering the little girl food. And she's like, oh, you're not going to get any food until you tell me who you are, but in a nice way.
I think that get rid of Hopper, right?
Yeah.
Get rid of the chief of police.
Keep the
have Benny be the main character.
Yeah.
Have Benny the cook be the main character.
Yeah.
In Under the Dome, the novel, I haven't seen the TV show,
yeah.
the Stephen King novel Under the Dome, the main character is a cook called Barbie. He's great.
Yeah.
He's an awesome character. He's a cook. He used to be a GI or something. It was great having this cook be this main character, and I think cooks are underrepresented in media. I think cooks and hospitality workers in general make really interesting characters.
Yeah, of course.
But I think he would have been a much better main character had he been wound up in this whole thing rather than the chief of police, which is something we've seen 1,000 times before. And it was really irritating to have that freshness, you know, oh, what a cool character, and then he's gone. Yeah. And then we're stuck with, you know,
Hopper.
Is he a drunk? Isn't he a drunk Hopper? And his dead daughter, which we learned about in the first episode.
Yeah.
One of the other things, a couple of my other favorite characters we'll talk about quickly. The little sister. Okay, I don't know how much you've seen of her yet, but just Mike's little sister is the MVP of the entire series.
Really?
She's, I think, the best actress in the entire show. She's about 2 years old or something. I think it's twins that play her, but very, very funny, on point performance.
That's another callback as well.
Twins.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, how else do you get good children actors in TV series with slave labor laws?
Just one break for a second, which is, at what point do picked up references or theories just be poor interpretations of the reality of the situation? So you could say that those twins that's a little bit of a meta joke because of the Olsen twins, which was the Full House in the 1980s. But it's more the fact that that's actually the best way to have a 2-year-old characters if you find a twin, because
child slavery
it's way
laws.
Easier to film with them.
Yeah, because you can give them proper breaks. Otherwise, you have to use your shooting schedule around children because they can only work for like 3 hours a day or whatever it is.
Don't work for children, guys. Don't work for children.
The other character I wanted to talk about is a fan favorite, massive fan favorite. It's Barb. Okay, so she's the Molly Ringwald character. She's kind of this bigger, frumpier lady, teenager. She's got her pants up really high. Did she grab you? Was she interesting? Did you want to see more Barbs?
Not really. Like, she was okay, but I've seen her before. She's just the moral paragon of her who's looking out for her friend. I did like, at the very least, that her morality was corrupted. At least in the second episode I saw, where she was offered a beer. Yeah. Right? And most of the time she'd have someone say, oh, I'm not going to have that. That's bad for me. And some science excuse, because that's if you wanted to harken back and just copy something. She actually was like, okay, I'm giving into peer pressure, fine. I'm trying. And she fails. Like, honestly, that was one of the things I thought would have gone differently. What happens is she cuts herself by accident, just a little bit, instead of it going in and it just exploding everywhere in her face. Yeah. That was what I thought would happen. I didn't think she'd cut herself, and she did cut herself. And I thought, oh, that's kind of real, because I feel like that's probably what would happen.
That's actually like what a major plot point in the story, her cutting herself, though.
Yeah, well, there you go. Didn't know that.
But you'll find out that later.
Yeah.
But
I'm watching it with my wife, so it's one of those things when you watch something with your couple, you have to wait for your wife, otherwise you get in trouble and people get annoyed at you. It's like you can't win.
We'll just clear we'll talk about that in a second. Binge watching shows with other people.
Yeah,
Barb's is interesting in that she's completely uninteresting because I've seen her 1,000 times before. But her presence reminded me of another show that does 80s nostalgia a lot better, I think, than Stranger Things, which is Freaks and Geeks. Have you ever watched Freaks and Geeks?
Yeah, I watched it for a bit. Yeah, when it was on like ages ago.
Oh, okay, so Freaks and Geeks has a lot of people that you recognize. You're probably going to recognize most of the cast. There is Linda Cardinelli. I can't remember. Yeah, I think that's how you say her name. You'll recognize her from bit parts, but James Franco is in it. Seth Rogen is in it. What's his face? Marshall from How I Met Your Mother is in it. There is Martin Starr, who is the guy with glasses, the tall Satanist guy from, you'll know him from Silicon Valley.
Is he? Yeah, him.
He's been in a lot of stuff. He was in Party Down. He was in a bunch of other stuff.
Yep.
There's a lot of people that you'd see in that show, and you go, "Oh, it's that person from that. It's that person from that." The mum from Freaks and Geeks is the mum in Girls. There's a lot of things like that. But that show does 80s reference a lot better, and it has the whole thing about Freaks and Geeks, right? Is it's about a girl whose granddad died, or grandma or something has died, and now she's found that she no longer self-identifies as a nerd.
Yeah.
She feels that she fits in with the freaks. You know, she's feeling this teenage angst or this teenage darkness in her, and she doesn't feel like she conforms to the stereotype of nerd anymore, and she wants to hang out with these people who are feeling similar things to her, feeling like they don't belong in society, you know, that typical teenage outcast phase of her life.
Yeah.
And she starts wearing her dad's old army jacket and starts hanging out with people she shouldn't be hanging out with, who are smoking drugs and doing all sorts of getting into teenage shenanigans.
Yeah.
And about her brother, her younger brother, who is he's a super nerd.
Yeah.
He plays D&D, he does all that sort of thing, and they don't care.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and he's kind of moving into the stage of his life where he's starting to become interested in girls.
Yeah.
And towards the end of the series, we find out, is he going to become a popular kid now?
Yeah.
You know, is he going to move out of his geek phase and into being a popular person? And what does that mean for his other relationships? But that handles this idea of teenage relationships in a much more complex way than something like Stranger Things does. Because Stranger Things just takes the stereotypes from other shows and, you know, prolongs them.
Yeah.
You know, runs out those stereotypes.
Yeah.
And not explore them in the intricacies that Freaks and Geeks does. And I think that's a shame, because there was that opportunity to do so.
Yeah.
In a high school set showing the modern era with stereotypes from the 80s.
Yeah.
Could have used more twisting. There is some, especially towards the end of the series, but not enough.
Let's see, Freaks and Geeks probably would have been a more popular show had it been released today.
Had it been.
Yeah.
Yeah, Freaks and Geeks was not popular at the time. It
No.
only ran like half a season or something, but it's like got a cult following.
And I also think that it has something to do with, as well, with the decade. They chose to do the, not the 80s, but it was it the 80s?
It was
Freaks and Geeks?
set in the 80s,
Yep.
but it was released in the
Early
early
2000s.
2000s, I think.
Yeah, and you could even argue that maybe it's one of the transitional things where people... What was the popular thing then? The period piece, I guess, from the 1950s onwards. In the 2000s, that was that 70s show. That was a big thing. That was a thing that people were like, yeah, this is great. I love that 70s show. But this is set in the 80s. It doesn't really work. You move a little bit forward. You move a bit more forward, right? Before then, it was TV shows set in the 70s, music set in the 80s. That was cool. Today, it's music from the 90s is that nostalgic crap that everyone loves, and movies from the 80s. That's nostalgia. I love that. What if this follows that trend? Because, I mean, you got Ghostbusters as well. You know, people going on about the Ghostbusters ruining childhood. In fact, I never saw it until I was in my bloody, until I was 1996 or something.
Yeah. This is something that interests me a lot, right? The period of time that is currently thought of as the nostalgic era. Now, it's impossible to be nostalgic for something that you weren't alive for, right?
Yeah.
Well, there is a word for that, the feeling of nostalgia for something that you weren't there for. But
actually, I think that not being alive for it actually makes it easier for you to be nostalgic for that period.
Because you weren't...
You weren't there for the bad stuff. You're only there for the good stuff, which is reflected again in that reality setting of maybe Hawkins isn't a great place to live.
Yeah. It's a really interesting thing, because stuff about the 80s that I really feel connected to, even though, you know, I was only alive for 6 months in the 80s.
Yeah, yeah.
I was born in July in 1989, so I have no memory.
Day?
26, so towards the end of July.
Okay, cool.
Why? Mine that data.
Mine that data, baby. Mine that data.
So I have no living memory of the 80s, and any memory that I would have would be completely superficial. But there's a lot of things that I really connect to, attitudes and ideas and music and stuff that really speaks to me about the 80s. And I wonder if this is some kind of collective unconscious or subconscious thing where the society moves through these phases.
Yeah.
It's also, at the moment, it's also fairly popular to be nostalgic for the 70s. And I've noticed this in fashion.
Yeah.
You know, especially in men's fashion, you know, the haircuts.
Yeah.
Everywhere. You see the hippie haircuts starting to come back. And it's also the 90s as well.
Yeah.
A lot of girls are wearing those 90s choker things.
That is coming back into fashion, isn't it?
Wearing those 90s denim jackets and stuff like that.
It's so weird how that happens. I mean, you may think there's like this cascading effect of fashion and culture that gets upgraded by various different areas. You've got fashion, you've got music, we've got media, movies, and they're all from different time periods. And they come together, they coalesce to become this new time period, this new design, this new clothes that now fit it a little bit better. And that's why maybe that's how you get new fashion, you get new cultural icons, because it's the amalgamation of something new
remixing
with old stuff. Nothing is new, everything is old, just redone. Which
is why I disagree with the point that cultural appropriation is evil. Yeah. Because this is how humans come up with new stuff. There's nothing new under the sun. Everything we've ever come up with is some combination of things. It's, the way that you combined it that's important. Yeah. And in Stranger Things, there's not enough originality. It's too much remixing, I think. Whereas, fashion is, these remixing of these ideas. Anyway, there was something else in that. How do you think the era that people are nostalgia for is, universally decided? Is it the majority of people who are alive at the current point and what they were alive to experience, or is it, just a feeling in the air?
If I could know why some type of nostalgic reason is the way it is and what drives that, I would probably be a millionaire.
Yeah, that's true.
And I'm not. So I don't know what it is, but it's got to be some sort. It's got to be reflecting societal desires for something else.
Yeah.
And it's got to also be maybe, I don't know, it's got to be backlash against the current system.
I think a lot of it,
as well as it's definitely it's got a lot to do with rose tintedness and the lack of real life experience of that time. I imagine we're going to have kids soon that'll say, 2000s were pretty cool, man. They were a pretty wild time to be alive.
There's nothing good about the 2000s.
Someone say 9/11. Wow, that would have been a pretty wild thing to experience. Yeah, it was pretty fucking wild. It was on TV for 4 days non-stop. It was not cool. It was boring.
Yeah.
It was not the scary, awful time to be alive, but that is how it'll be marketed in 10 years. This scary, wild time to be alive. Oh my God, everything got super real back then.
I think, though, and we've talked about this before, but I think that if you compare the time that we were growing up, right? We were 10 or so when 9/11 happened. Growing up into that was completely normal for us because we didn't know any different. Maximized airport security, stuff like that. This thing of fear. If you see an abandoned bag at a train station,
that's not my Baghdad.
That's
which I always thought was really funny because it sounded like Baghdad.
I thought that was the joke that we were making. It's this inbuilt instinct that you have, where it's like, oh, just keep an eye on that for a sec, just in case. Or a couple of months ago now, I was at the theme park, the Gold Rush theme park in Ballarat. I can't remember what it's called, Sovereign Hill. And there was a gunshot. And I was just like, for a split second, I was like getting ready to, run.
Knock over an
basically.
Old lady so that
but
so that they would go for her first, so that way you make your getaway.
No, but like in my mind, I was like, the exit's over there. This, I'm already thinking through everything. Do I need to carry Maddie? Can she run? Like all these things, like going through my mind really, really quickly. And because I heard a scream as well that coincided with the gunshot, some Asian tourist started screaming, and I was like calculating everything, and like in the middle of that second between the gunshot and that 1 second it took me to realize, it was just, a guy with a gun, part of the Sovereign Hill thing. That's natural to us. Whereas if you were, I guess, in a different era, that wouldn't be a natural reaction to you.
No, it wouldn't be. Like, and I that's the thing. I've noticed that I do that a lot too. Even before something happens, I'll usually try to stake out and look for some form of exit or escape ahead of time, because you never know what could happen. And this is not something that would have ever concerned most people in the past, but it's just, I guess, it's growing up in the post 9/11 world. And it's interesting how monumental events create catalysts, as opposed to this ebbs and flows, this soft waves of culture that come and they crash against the shores. A catalyst can just flip culture in a completely opposite direction.
Which is full circle to what we were talking about before. Horror often takes these ideas and brings them out in ways that we can understand. And a recommendation for anybody that's interested in learning about horror theory, there's a lot of stuff that you can read, like loads and loads and loads. But one good one is Dense Macabre by Stephen King. Really, really good book on horror. I think it's out of print, but you can probably get a copy somewhere. Really, really interesting is Stephen King. And it's a lot about this 80s nostalgia horror as well, because that's the stuff that he writes.
Yeah.
And about where those influences come from and these societal fears. How do they affect people? How do you right to predict these things. Like, really, really interesting stuff. Anyway, let's talk about quickly, completely change of pace. How do you watch a show with a partner?
Yeah.
So stuff like Stranger Things, any of the Netflix shows are designed to be binged.
Yeah.
Basically. That's why they release them all on the same day. They're really watchable. A lot of them have a through arc, some more so than others. Like BoJack Horseman has less of a solid arc than some of the others do, but it's still there. You know, it's something that you can watch and watch a lot. You know, it keeps you on their platform. That's what they're there to design to do. Get you to watch Netflix and stay on Netflix. Keep renewing your subscription.
Yeah, of course. Because you got a reason to watch it, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not just something to watch, but it's something like, oh, when I get home, I'm going to watch another 6 episodes of BoJack Horseman.
Yeah. See, I've always wondered about Netflix, and I know this is a mental thing, is that I've always thought that Netflix end goal is obviously to try to get you to binge their content they produce, but to try to reduce the amount of content that you actually watch that is not associated with them. Just because every time they do that, there's a licensing fee, there's a cost involved in that. So getting you to have the option of watching it, like I could watch all these movies, but not actually watching the movies will get them a higher return because they won't have to pay as much for licensing fees. Because they can say, your movies aren't doing as well on Netflix. Why is that? Oh, because your movies suck. You know, you can use their market power to say, we're going to actually lower the price or lower the fees we pay to you for each watch or to rent out the content for a particular time.
That's a very good point considering Netflix Australia. Netflix America has a much better network than Netflix Australia does. And I would say the majority of people that have Netflix Australia pretty much only have Netflix Australia so that they can watch Netflix shows.
Yeah.
Because platforms like Stan have a much better collection.
They do.
You know, and you can still torrent a lot of stuff that you need to watch, which Netflix doesn't have anyway.
Yeah.
Netflix doesn't have a lot of stuff that you want to watch. It just has kind of incidental stuff. Sometimes it has something that's like, oh, I've been meaning to watch that. Oh my goodness. But that's like a once a month event.
Yeah.
Most of the time it's like, what's on here? What's on here? What's on here? Oh, what's the new Netflix show? Oh, I'll watch that.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. With Netflix, you take, for instance, we'll swap that out for YouTube as a comparison.
Yeah.
With YouTube, I find myself watching that way more because the creators I feel more compelled to watch their content and sit down and watch it because I know, I can give it a try. It's going to get good. With Netflix, it is not designed to get you to watch anything. Just to give the illusion that you've got something to watch.
Yeah.
So that you'll keep paying for it, but you may not actually end up watching it. Because I'll go through a whole bunch of things and go, I don't know if I want to watch any of these.
Yeah.
I can't commit to any of these, especially with another person, because then that's a difficult decision. You spend an hour doing that, and you're like, oh, I'll just watch this.
I think there's a lot of psychology that's gone into the way that Netflix is laid out.
Yeah.
Like, even just in the color scheme. Like, I know from sitting on the YouTube front page, right? I'll go to my subscription page, the pages that I'm subscribed to, and it'll have all of my things, all the latest videos from all the creators that I'm subscribed to. And then I'll open one up, but I'll keep looking at my subscription box while I've started to watch something. And then I'll go, oh, actually, I want to watch that. I want to watch that. And I'll have like 3 open, and then I'll pause 2. And then I'll start watching one, get bored. Maybe I'll switch back. I might watch the whole thing, maybe. But I'm watching stuff. On Netflix, you'll be like, it's dark. You kind of like, you feel a bit claustrophobic. It's more locked in. You're like, oh, I don't know. Like, is this one better than this one? I don't want to start watching this one because what about this? Like, you have less freedom. You kind of feel of constricted.
That's long form versus short form content. Short form content is the buffet line.
But a lot of YouTube content these days
can be quite long.
Yeah, and a lot of stuff that I watch is 20 minutes plus, which is the length of a YouTube TV show anyway.
Well, a lot of the ones that are like 30 or 40 minutes, they're not made, and they're not produced in the sense that you have to follow each and every minute. Like, I watch some Let's Plays. I watch some video gamers who actually I enjoy watching them go play a game, and they give the commentary, but not like in the bullshit, sit in the corner, like voiceover. I enjoy that. I can stop watching halfway through, and I'm not going to miss anything, because it's all self-contained episodes almost always. You just have to follow kind of what the guy's saying, or if you want to hear the story of it. Netflix, it's a commitment, because, if you're going halfway through, and you're like, this is shit, you have to go and find something else because you're not going to watch the rest of it. So it's a commitment for at least half of it. Whereas this one, it's, I've got no risk watching this. If it sucks, I'll just stop watching it.
And that's, like we were saying before, it's a bit of both. It's a bit
Loss aversion.
Yeah. It's a bit of the platform, but also the content. So it's a bit of both. On Netflix, even just the platform makes you feel like you're committing to watching something, not just the content.
Yeah.
And that's why some of the lighter stuff doesn't really work on Netflix.
Yeah.
Because you kind of, when you've chosen something, you feel invested and you want to be watching something a bit heavier just because of the way that the platform's built and is displayed. Anyway, did you have any thoughts on watching something with your wife? feeling committed. Is there anything you wanted to say about that?
Well, I don't know. If it becomes an activity where maybe you don't like the entire show that much, it's okay.
Yeah, it becomes the activity
it becomes the activity
sharing.
of you sharing with your wife. And so that in and of itself is, I guess, positive because it gets you to watch the rest of the content. Yeah. And just getting you to watch it, though, requires some form of, what's the word? PR. It requires some sort of PR and social engineering to get people to be like, this is a popular show. Like right now, there's a lot of content about Stranger Things. And that's enough to get people to go, well, if everyone's watching it, it must be okay. My loss aversion goes down. I'll watch it with my partner. Yeah. And all of a sudden, I'm committed to watching this. Yeah, at a certain period. It's
interesting the way that you choose something to watch with a partner because it's like I'm choosing this to watch. This may not be something that I would watch by myself and just binge out. It might be something that is fun to watch with somebody. You want something a bit more story, something that you can talk about. Maybe
binge shows with your partner or any friend, but a partner's usually the best one.
Yeah.
Binge shows are things you can watch because they seem like an activity that you can both be kind of happy with. If I said, I spent all day watching this, you kind of feel personally shitty because you're just basically, you're sitting around doing fuck all. Yeah. But if you're doing something with your partner, even though you're doing fuck all,
you're spending time.
You're still spending time and thus it feels better.
Yeah,
than
that's
what
true.
It is. Yeah.
It's like it's like with anything. The way that you choose something to do with somebody else is different to something that you choose to do by yourself. Like computer games, right?
Yeah.
The game that you choose to play by yourself is different to something that you commit to playing with somebody else.
Yeah. One of the biggest problems for Netflix, and it's just a short thing, it's always on one account, but it's always on one sub-account that you'll be watching Stranger Things on, because that's where it leads up to. But if you're watching it with a couple, Netflix doesn't know that.
Yeah.
It has no idea whether you're watching it by yourself or as a couple, and that's going to be a problem for them in the future.
Which surprises me, because you think you'd be able to select multiple profiles. It'd be better for their data mining. Yeah. It would be better for them to, when you logged in, it's like, who's watching? This person, this person, this person. We're all watching together. Rather than just Joseph is watching this show.
You need to have some sort of way of doing it, maybe some sort of warnings or some sort of content. Like, I don't know, there could be some special way where it's like, you could set up each profile as having, if you wanted to have some sort of warning for a television show about like mature guidance, wrap it as on this idea that you could have M, MA, R rating, but also have like, if you're not so big on nudity or swearing, you can tell Netflix that. Well, then it'll just pop up and say, who's watching? Me and Joanna. Yeah. Okay, well, this is, just so you know, Joanna, it's got this and this in it. And John, it's got this and this in it, so it'll tell you all these different ratings. But that's just for your show.
That's
for them. They know that you and Joanna are now watching it, and that's important.
Yeah, so it'll mix your recommendations. So that's something that you would both enjoy.
Yeah,
that's really smart, and that's next level recommendation engine. And I don't think they're quite there yet. Yeah. And do they ever need to get to that point for the business model? Maybe not, but maybe they will.
They might need to, because they also need to know who's making the decisions. Is it the man?
Yeah,
because you're using the man's account, or is it just because it's on his
card?
Just be the
is he just
the purchaser? And that's a big deal, because who are you appealing to now when you're advertising?
Yeah. And I've set up the account, right, and you've set up an account, if we share a Netflix and mine's first, and you just clicked on mine because it's first. Yeah. That's a thing as well. It's like in voting.
Or
a lot of people
or if
vote
there's too
just
many
down the line.
accounts on your Netflix account and you have to share an account with somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you do.
Like I do. Yeah.
One more thing I wanted to talk about was the paranormal aspect of Stranger Things, right? And you're only, like we keep saying, towards the beginning. How do you feel that mix is sitting?
I'm liking some of the mix there at the beginning.
Drama to paranormal, I mean. Like, is the paranormal too much? Is it not enough? Is it the type of paranormal you like to see? It's kind of that misty, Cthulhu-y type stuff.
Yeah,
also with the fire starter.
Yeah, it's very secretive, very quiet.
Military
style. And it's interesting. It's just got the science elements of it, so it's baiting you with what's happening, what's here, but it doesn't do too much. It's leading you in, and I like that. And I like also that we have this military installation we don't know if they're engineering or what. Yeah. But versus this contrast of Dungeons and Dragons, which is fantasy / magic. So it's fantasy / magic versus science magic, and there's always those two different types of magics. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
and I would have contrast. I was just about to say I would like to see that pushed more. Right. Yeah. What if this military complex was completely mundane? Yeah. Right? What if they just happened to have a military complex that were testing aircraft or something there? Yeah. And then some local guy had gone mad and become a shaman and then summoned something, and the military just happened to be involved. Like, maybe it wasn't their fault. Like it always is.
Like, it'd just be that they're trying to do their job. Yeah. But these people are just magical.
Yeah.
And it's just like, what the fuck happened? We just got to stop them. And they actually have somewhat moralistic reasons, the somewhat okay morals in the end, ends justify the means style.
It's those little twists, those little flares that make things a lot more interesting than they are in Stranger Things.
Yeah.
I feel like I've been pretty down on Stranger Things, but overall, if we're coming to wrap up now because we've gone a bit over time, but I think it's okay. And I think Stranger Things is good in that it's an original intellectual property. And people are starting to reopen their eyes to original IPs, and people are starting to become bored of seeing the same stuff recycled over and over again. People are starting to realize that, just because a movie has Superman in it does not mean it's going to be a good movie. Just because I recognize this, just because it's familiar, doesn't mean I'm going to enjoy it.
Yeah.
And just because something's different doesn't mean I won't enjoy it. Stuff like Stranger Things is really good for that. And we need to hype up stuff like Stranger Things when it does come around, when it is even a little bit good. Because it's like, people, you need to watch new stuff so we get more new stuff instead of just the old trash. Because if people keep continuing to go see the reboots of every other movie, why wouldn't you keep making that stuff? Because you're going to make money out of it.
Yeah, look, the reboots demonstrate that there is an appeal for a specific class, genre, time, but the new IPs show that you need something different. You need something that takes something old, transforms it completely, but still has some of the elements of the old. And that's a profitable model for now. I say this now because when competition picks up, people are going to get sick of it and they're going to want something else.
But it's not just this revitalization of something old that I think is good, like the 80s nostalgia and Stranger Things. I think it's just the fact that even though a lot of it is recycled, it's not Goonies, the series. Yeah. It's not, It, the reboot, which is happening. There's a reboot to It. Yeah.
The reboot of Ben-Hur happening too.
Yeah, what is that about? Anyway, what would you rate Stranger Things out of what you've seen so far?
I'd probably give it 4 out of 5 Stranger Things.
4 out of 5.
4 out of 5 11s.
4 out of 5 11s. Okay. I'm going to give Stranger Things 3 out of 5 11s.
Good. That's a good rating.
Is there anything else you wanted to talk about before we wrap it all up?
Not really, other than just like if you guys, normal listeners or even new listeners, if you like us doing some of these other shows and just doing basically general overviews of the show, just let us know. You can tell us. How can you tell us? Well, I'll tell you exactly.
Oh, thanks, Anthony.
Yeah, I'm stealing Joe's line here. You can find us on all of the social medias, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Just look for Tales from the Twist. You can join Chicken Twisties. It's where all the fans of our show hang out. That's on Facebook. Just look for Chicken Twisties, and the links are in the show notes below. If you want to give us a rating or a review, just do that on iTunes. That'd be awesome. And don't forget to subscribe while you're there. I'm offering people Chicken Twisties if they give us a rating. All right. And then they screen cap it and send it to us either via our Tales from the Twist page or Chicken Twisties. And lastly, don't forget to go to our website at talesfromthetwist.wordpress.com.
talesfromthetwist.wordpress.com. That's all we have time to talk about today. Anything you want to close out with?
No. I don't know. Strange things happen when you're strangering down the twist.
Cool.
And there you go. That's the time into the show. Get it?
My name is Joe Lewis.
And I'm Anthony Bull.
Thanks very much for listening. Back to Around the Twist next week. Have a good week and stay twisty.